There are stories that stay with you long after the last page is turned. This is one of them. It is a tale from the old West Montana Territory. Autumn of 1883. When life was hard and kindness was rare as rain in August, it is about a young widow named Hope Colton, 2 orphaned children she took in as her own, and a drifter who showed up one evening with nothing but a sack of food and a lonesome heart. Some folks might call it a love story. Others might call it a story about family, the kind you choose, not the kind you're born into. I reckon it's both, and something more besides. If you've ever felt alone at a table set for one, or wondered whether good things still happen to ordinary people, this story is for you. Pull up a chair. Stay a while. Bae. The lamp was almost out of oil. Hope Colton stood at the kitchen table, her hands flat against the rough pine surface, staring at what lay before her. 3 tin plates, 2 small pieces of Johnny cake, dried hard from sitting 3 days, 1 plate empty. She picked up the empty plate, set it down at her place. The children sat across from her, watching Tommy, 8 years old, with eyes that had seen too much too soon. Lucy, 5, still young enough to ask questions that had no good answers. "Supper's ready," Hope said. She divided the Johnny cake with her fingers, placing the larger piece on Tommy's plate, the smaller on Lucy's. Her own plate she left bare. She poured water from the clay pitcher into each of their tin cups, then filled her own cup to the brim. Water was free. Water was something. Tommy looked at her plate, then at her face. He pushed his piece of Johnny cake toward her without a word. Hope pushed it back. "Eat, sweetheart. You ain't got nothing." "So, I ate earlier." The lie came easy now. She'd told it so many times this month it almost felt true. Lucy picked at her bread, crumbs falling onto the table like tiny broken promises. "Mama, why don't you eat with us?" "I'm not hungry, baby." Lucy accepted this. Children believe what they need to believe. Tommy did not. He stared at his mother, not his real mother, but the only one he had left, and something in his jaw tightened. Hope lifted her cup and drank slowly, letting the water sit in her belly, willing it to feel like something more than nothing. Outside, the September wind pushed against the cabin walls. The lamp flickered, shadows jumped and settled. She should add more oil, but there was no more oil. She should light the fire in the stove, but there was no more wood cut small enough, and her arms ached from scrubbing Mrs. Patterson's floors all morning for a handful of potatoes that turned out to be rotten inside. The church was 10 miles east, and the preacher had his own mouths to feed. The neighbors had stopped answering their doors weeks ago. A widow with 2 orphans was more burden than any homestead could carry. Tommy ate his Johnny cake in small bites, chewing each one a long time, like he was trying to make it last forever. Lucy hummed something tuneless, her feet swinging beneath the table, not quite touching the floor. Hope turned toward the window. The glass was dark. Nothing out there but the dirt yard and the broken fence and the road that led to town, 3 miles away, where people whispered about the auction widow and her charity children. She pressed her hand against her stomach. It cramped, but quietly. She'd learned to ignore it. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, slow, steady, coming up the road. Hope's whole body went rigid. Tommy stopped chewing. Lucy stopped humming. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Then they stopped, right outside. Hope reached for the oak walking stick leaning against the wall, the only thing resembling a weapon in the house. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Nobody came out here after dark. Nobody had any reason to. A horse snorted. Leather creaked, someone dismounting. Footsteps on the porch. Heavy. A man's boots. Tommy slid off his chair and moved to stand beside Hope. His small hands balled into fists. Lucy stayed frozen at the table, her eyes wide as silver dollars. 3 knocks on the door. Hope didn't move. 3 more knocks. Then a voice, low, rough, uncertain. "Ma'am, anybody home?" She didn't answer. "I ain't meaning no trouble," the voice said. I got more food than I can eat, and I don't much like eating alone." Hope's grip tightened on the stick. Please, ma'am, I can leave it on the porch if you'd rather, but it's good food. Shame to waste it. Lucy whispered, Mama, what's he want? Hope didn't know. That was the terrifying part. She didn't know. There's something about a stranger's kindness that makes you wonder what's behind it. If this story's found you tonight, drop a word below and let us know where you're reading from. Sometimes the best company is knowing someone else is listening too. Hope lifted the latch. The door swung open 6 inches. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of horse and dust and something else, something that made her stomach clench. Meat, fresh meat. A man stood on the porch, tall, lean, sun-darkened skin, and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in days. His hat was in his hands, crushed against his chest. At his feet sat a burlap sack, heavy and bulging. He raised both palms toward her. I ain't here for trouble, ma'am. Hope kept the oak stick between them. What do you want? He didn't answer right away. His eyes dropped to the porch boards, then to the sack, then back to some middle distance that seemed to hold his attention. I work over at Miller's place, 7 miles north. He shifted his weight from one boot to the other. They pay me in food mostly, more than I can eat. Hope's knuckles whitened around the stick. We don't need charity. It ain't charity. He rubbed the back of his neck. His voice came out quieter now, almost rough. Eating alone gets tiresome. Figured maybe... He trailed off. The wind picked up, rattling the loose shingle above the door. Hope studied his face. No liquor smell, no wild look in his eyes, just a man who couldn't seem to finish his own sentence. Figured maybe what? He met her gaze for the first time. Something flickered their embarrassment. Maybe, or something lonelier. Figured maybe I could eat here, with folks, if you'd allow it. Before Hope could answer, a small hand tugged at her skirt. Lucy had crept up behind her, peering around the doorframe at the stranger. What's in the bag? The man looked down at the child. His expression shifted, softened, in a way Hope hadn't expected. Salt pork, he said. Potatoes, flour for biscuits. Lucy's eyes went round. She looked up at Hope, then back at the sack, then back at Hope again. Tommy appeared at Hope's other side. He said nothing, but his gaze fixed on that burlap bag like it held every answer to every prayer he'd stopped believing in. Hope's chest tightened. She knew what hunger looked like on a child's face. She'd seen it every night for weeks now, the careful way they chewed, the way they watched her empty plate, the questions they'd learned to stop asking. The stranger waited, hat in hand, food at his feet, and Hope realized, with a coldness settling deep in her gut, that she was about to let a man she'd never seen before sit down at her table. Hope stepped aside. The stranger picked up the burlap sack and carried it across the threshold. He moved carefully, like a man entering a church, shoulders slightly hunched, boots placed soft on the floorboards. Set it on the table, Hope said. He did. The sack landed with a heavy thump. Lucy climbed onto her chair to peer inside, and Tommy edged closer, his wariness warring with something stronger. Hope untied the rope binding the sack's mouth. Inside a slab of salt pork wrapped in cloth, 6 potatoes still caked with dirt, a paper bag of flour, a smaller bag of coffee beans, real coffee. She hadn't smelled coffee in 3 months. Her hands trembled as she lifted out the pork. The meat was pink and marbled with fat, solid, real. I'll cook, she said. Her voice came out strange, thick. The stranger nodded. He looked around the cabin, taking in the single room with its 3 chairs, the narrow bed in the corner where the children slept, the cold stove, the nearly empty lamp. You only got 3 chairs, he said. I know. He walked to the corner where Hope kept the apple crate she used for storing root vegetables empty now. Of course. He dragged it to the table and sat down on it, testing his weight. The wood creaked but held. This'll do. Hope turned to the stove. Her hands moved on their own, scraping the last of the lard from the tin, dropping it into the cast-iron skillet, setting the pan on the cold burner. She crouched and opened the stove's belly, arranging the few sticks of kindling she'd been saving. stranger's voice came from behind her. You need wood split? No. She struck the match. The kindling caught. She fed it carefully, one small piece at a time, until the flame grew strong enough for a real log. The skillet began to heat. She unwrapped the salt pork and sliced it with her kitchen knife, thick slabs that sizzled when they hit the iron. The smell filled the cabin, rich, heavy, alive. Lucy made a small sound, not words, just a sound. Hope peeled potatoes over the basin, her knife working fast. Curls of brown skin falling into the gray water. She quartered them, dropped them into the pot, covered them with water from the pitcher. The stranger sat at the table, saying nothing. Tommy watched him from across the room, still standing, still wary. Sit down, Hope told her son. Supper's coming. Tommy sat. His eyes never left the stranger. The pork crackled in the pan. Hope turned the slices with a fork, watching the edges crisp and curl. She mixed flour and water and a pinch of salt, working the dough with her fingers until it was smooth, then flattened it into rounds and laid them in the second skillet. The cabin filled with warmth. Real warmth, not just from the stove, but from the smell of food cooking, from the sound of grease popping, from the steam rising off the potatoes. When everything was ready, Hope set 4 plates on the table, 4 tin forks, 4 tin cups filled with water. She didn't trust herself to make coffee without crying. She served the pork first, 2 slices for Tommy, 2 for Lucy, 2 for the stranger, 1 for herself. The potatoes she mashed with the back of her fork, mixing in some of the pork fat. She divided them the same way, more for the children, less for herself. The biscuits she placed in the center of the table, still steaming. 4 people sat around a table meant for 3. Nobody spoke. Tommy picked up his fork. He cut a small piece of pork, put it in his mouth, and chewed slowly. His eyes closed. Lucy didn't bother with the fork. She grabbed a biscuit with both hands and bit into it, crumbs falling down her chin. The stranger ate quietly, methodically, his eyes on his plate. Hope watched her children eat. She watched the color come back into their faces, watched their shoulders drop, watched the tension drain from their small bodies. She couldn't swallow past the lump in her throat. This is real good, ma'am. The stranger's voice broke the silence. I appreciate you cooking. Hope nodded. She still hadn't touched her own plate. My horse is named Dust, the stranger said. He wasn't looking at anyone in particular, just talking. Big gray gelding, steady as they come. Except for one thing. Lucy looked up, biscuit still clutched in her fist. What thing? He's scared of chickens. Tommy stopped chewing. A horse scared of chickens. Scared to death. The stranger's mouth twitched. Last month, one of Miller's hens got loose. Little red thing, half the size of my boot. Dust saw her coming and took off running, galloped clear around the barn twice before I could stop him. Lucy giggled. The sound bubbled up out of her like water from a spring. A chicken chased your horse. Chased him good. I had to climb up on the barn roof to get him calmed down. Spent an hour up there, talking sweet to him, while that hen strutted around below like she owned the place. Lucy laughed. A real laugh, high and bright and startled, like she'd surprised herself by making it. Tommy grinned, his mouth full of mashed potato. Hope gripped the edge of the stove. Her knuckles went white. Her shoulders shook. She hadn't heard Lucy laugh in 4 months. She'd forgotten what it sounded like. Behind her, the stranger kept talking, his voice low and easy. He was telling Tommy about Dust now, how the horse liked apples but hated carrots, how he snored like an old man when he slept. Hope pressed her hand over her mouth. She didn't turn around, and she realized, with a certainty that terrified her, that she wanted this man to come back. 3 days passed. Hope told herself she wasn't listening for hoofbeats. She scrubbed the cabin floor and didn't glance toward the window. She mended Tommy's trousers and kept her eyes on the needle. She fed the chickens and didn't look down the road. On the 3rd evening, she heard them anyway. Lucy was out the door before Hope could stop her. The child's bare feet slapped against the porch boards, and she stood at the railing, one hand shading her eyes against the late sun. It's him. Mama, it's the horseman. Hope's hands stilled over the pot she was scrubbing. Water dripped from her fingers onto the floor. She walked to the doorway, slowly, like walking towards something she wasn't sure she wanted to reach. The gray horse came up the road at an easy walk. Silas sat tall in the saddle, and across his lap lay something wrapped in cloth and green leaves. He lifted one hand in greeting when he saw Lucy waving. "Evening," he said, reining in by the porch. "You came back." Lucy bounced on her toes. "Brought supper." He dismounted and lifted the bundle from the saddle. "Trout. Caught them this morning in the Blackfoot. Wrapped them in sage to keep." Hope stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. "You didn't need to do that." "I know." He climbed the porch steps and held out the bundle. The smell of sage and river water drifted up from the cloth. "But I had good luck fishing, more than I could eat alone." Their eyes met. Hope took the fish. Tommy appeared behind her, squeezing past to stand on the porch. He'd been quiet since that first supper, watching the road almost as often as Hope had, though neither of them admitted it. Now his gaze fixed on Silas's hip, on the leather holster there, and the dark handle of the revolver tucked inside. "You got a gun," Tommy said. Silas looked down at the boy. "I do. Can I see it?" Hope opened her mouth to refuse, but Silas was already unbuckling the holster. He drew the revolver slowly, keeping the barrel pointed at the ground, and crouched to Tommy's level. "Colt 45, he said. "See how I'm holding it, away from anybody. That's the first rule." Tommy leaned closer, studying the weapon with solemn intensity. "You ever shoot anybody?" "No." "Never?" Silas shook his head. "This here's for bears and mountain cats. Scaring them off. Mostly. I never shot a man. And I don't plan to start." He slid the revolver back into the holster and buckled it closed. Tommy watched every movement. "Why not?" "Because killing a man changes you. And I don't want to be changed that way." Silas stood, brushing dust from his knee. "Your mama's got supper to cook. You want to help me with something while she works." Tommy's eyes narrowed. "Like what?" Silas nodded toward the side of the cabin. "Noticed your fence got 3 posts down? I got a hammer in my saddlebag. Could use someone to hold the rails steady while I drive the nails." Hope stepped forward. "You don't need to." But Silas was already walking toward his horse, fishing in the saddlebag. He pulled out a hammer with an iron head and an oak handle, worn smooth from use. "Won't take long," he called over his shoulder. "Come on, boy." Tommy looked at Hope. She had no words for the expression on his face, half suspicion, half something else. Something hungry that had nothing to do with food. He followed Silas around the side of the cabin. Hope stood on the porch, the bundle of trout cold against her chest, and listened to the sounds that drifted back to her. The thunk of the hammer, the crack of wood settling into place. Silas's voice, low and patient, explaining something about the angle of the post. And Tommy's voice answering, asking questions, more words than he'd spoken in weeks. Hope went inside and laid the fish on the table. She unwrapped the sage leaves with trembling fingers. 4 trout, silver-scaled and firm, their eyes still clear. She cleaned them at the basin, scraping scales into the gray water, slitting bellies and pulling out guts with practiced hands. The work steadied her, gave her something to focus on besides the sounds from outside. The hammer stopped. She looked through the window. Silas stood by the fence, testing the repaired rails with both hands. Tommy stood beside him, holding a fistful of square-cut nails. The boy said something, and Silas laughed a short sound, surprised out of him. Then Silas reached out and ruffled Tommy's hair. Tommy didn't pull away. Hope's grip tightened on the edge of the basin. Her chest felt strange tight and loose at the same time, like something was shifting inside her that had been locked in place too long. She didn't know what to call this feeling, but she knew she was afraid of it. The light was fading now, turning the sky orange and purple above the mountains. Silas gathered his tools, said something to Tommy, and walked toward the porch. The boy followed at his heels like a shadow. They came inside smelling of sweat and sawdust. Tommy's cheeks were flushed. His eyes were bright. "Fence is fixed," Silas said. "Should hold through winter." Hope wiped her hands on her apron. "Thank you." "Weren't nothing." He hung his hat on the peg by the door, the same peg where her husband's hat used to hang, and Hope's breath caught in her throat. He didn't notice. He was looking at the table, at the cleaned fish laid out on the cutting board. Need help with supper? Hope shook her head. Her voice wouldn't come. Silas sat down on the apple crate, and Tommy sat beside him, and Lucy climbed into her chair, and Hope turned back to the stove with her heart pounding against her ribs. The hat hung on the peg, like it belonged there. Sunday morning came bright and cold. Hope stood at the window, watching Silas lead Dust in slow circles around the yard. The gray horse moved with patient steps, head bobbing, breath puffing white in the chill air. Tommy sat on the porch railing, his legs dangling. He hadn't taken his eyes off that horse since Silas arrived at dawn. Mrs. Colton. Silas had stopped near the porch. He held the reins loosely in one hand, the other resting on Dust's neck. I was thinking, if you'd allow it, I could teach the boy to ride. Hope's fingers tightened on the windowsill. She stepped outside, pulling her shawl close against the morning cold. He's never been on a horse. I know. What if he falls? Silas stroked Dust's muzzle. The horse nickered softly, pushing into his palm. I'll walk right beside him. He just sits, holds the mane. Dust does the rest. He glanced at the horse with something like affection. He's gentle as a lamb, long as there ain't no chickens around. A Tommy slid off the railing. His boots hit the dirt, and he stood there, waiting, his whole body taut with wanting. Hope looked at her son, at the hope burning in his eyes, hope she hadn't seen there in 2 years. Please, Mama. The word hit her like a fist. He'd stopped calling her Mama months ago, started calling her nothing at all, or sometimes just you, like the word was too heavy to carry. She swallowed hard. All right, but you hold on tight. Tommy was across the yard before she finished speaking. Silas caught him by the shoulders, steadying him, talking low. Easy now. Come around this side. Always mount from the left, that's the rule. He lifted Tommy like the boy weighed nothing and set him gently on Dust's back. Tommy's hands shot out, grabbing fistfuls of gray mane. That's it. Grip with your knees. Let your legs hang natural. Silas took the reins and began to walk. Dust followed, hooves crunching softly on the packed dirt. Tommy sat rigid at first, his shoulders hunched up around his ears. 1 circle around the yard, 2. By the 3rd circle, Tommy's shoulders had dropped. His grip on the mane loosened. His legs relaxed against Dust's flanks. By the 5th circle, he was smiling. Hope watched from the porch, her hand pressed against her chest. The boy up there on that horse didn't look like the Tommy she knew. The Tommy who flinched at loud noises, who checked the locks 3 times before bed, who carried grief like a stone in his pocket. This Tommy looked 8 years old. Just 8 years old. Lucy tugged at Hope's skirt. I want to ride too. You're too small, baby. But Tommy gets to, when you're bigger, Lucy pouted, her lower lip pushing out. But she stayed beside Hope, watching her brother circle the yard on the back of that big gray horse. Silas walked with one hand on the reins, the other resting lightly on Tommy's knee. He was talking. Hope couldn't hear the words, but she could see Tommy nodding, asking questions, leaning forward to pat Dust's neck. The sun climbed higher, the frost melted off the fence rails. Hope should have gone inside to start breakfast, but she couldn't move, couldn't look away. Finally, Silas led Dust back to the porch and helped Tommy down. The boy's legs wobbled when they hit the ground, and he grabbed Silas's arm to steady himself. How'd I do? Real good. Silas's voice was gruff, but his eyes were soft. Natural rider. Give it a few weeks. You'll be galloping. Tommy grinned a real grin, wide and unguarded. He turned and ran toward the porch. Mama, did you see me up there? I saw. Hope's voice cracked on the words. She pulled him into a hug, pressing her face against his hair. He smelled like horse and dust and little boy. Over Tommy's shoulder, she saw Silas watching them. He looked away quickly, busying himself with Dust's bridle. Lucy tugged at Hope's skirt again, harder this time. Mama, What is it? Baby! Lucy's eyes were fixed on Silas, on the way he stroked Dust's nose, the way he murmured to the horse, the way his shoulders hunched against the cold. Is Mr. Silas going to stay here forever? The question hung in the air like smoke. Hope's arms tightened around Tommy. She didn't answer. Mama. Lucy pulled at her skirt again. Is he? Silas had heard. Hope could tell by the way his hands stilled on the bridle, by the way his back went rigid. The silence stretched. Go inside, Hope said. Her voice came out sharper than she meant. Both of you. Breakfast. But Mama, inside, now. Tommy pulled away from her and took Lucy's hand. They went into the cabin, Lucy looking back over her shoulder with wounded eyes. Silas stood by his horse, not moving, not looking at her. Hope stood on the porch, her shawl clutched tight in both fists. Neither of them spoke. The wind picked up, rattling the loose shingle above the door. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out harsh and lonely. Hope opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. And then she heard it, the creak of wagon wheels on the road, coming from town. The wagon that Sunday morning had been the Hendersons, passing through on their way to church. They'd slowed long enough to stare at Silas, at the horse, at Hope standing on the porch with her shawl clutched against her chest, and then moved on without a word. But Hope had seen Mrs. Henderson lean toward her husband, had seen her lips move, had seen the way they both looked back over their shoulders as the wagon rolled away. 3 days later, Hope walked the 3 miles to Elkhorn with a basket of eggs balanced on her hip. Tommy's trousers had torn at the knee again. She needed fabric to patch them. The eggs were small, her hens had been laying poorly since the cold snap, but they should be enough to trade for a scrap of cloth. The general store sat at the end of Main Street, its windows dusty, its porch sagging at one corner. Hope climbed the steps and pushed through the door. The bell above the frame jangled. 2 women stood at the counter, their heads bent together. Mrs. Patterson from the farm north of town, Mrs. Greer, the blacksmith's wife. They looked up when the bell rang and stopped talking. Hope's grip tightened on the basket. She walked to the counter, keeping her eyes forward. The wooden floorboards creaked under her boots. Morning, she said. I've got eggs to trade. Looking for some calico. Just enough to patch a pair of trousers. Mrs. Foster, the shopkeeper, stood behind the long wooden counter. Her brass scale gleamed in the thin light from the window. Bolts of fabric lined the shelves behind her calico. Gingham, muslin colors bright as summer flowers. Mrs. Foster looked at Hope, then at the basket, then back at Hope. Let me see what you got. Hope set the basket on the counter. The eggs nestled in their bed of straw, 8 of them, brown-shelled, clean. Mrs. Patterson leaned toward Mrs. Greer. Her voice dropped, but not low enough. That's her. The auction widow. Mrs. Greer whispered back. Hope caught only fragments. Ooh, Cowboy. Every night, alone with her. Heat crawled up Hope's neck. Her cheeks burned. Mrs. Patterson's next words came clear as church bells. What do you suppose she pays him with? Hope's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her nails bit into her palms. Mrs. Foster picked up one of the eggs, turned it over in her fingers, set it down. She picked up another, did the same. These are awful small, she said. Her voice carried no warmth. I couldn't give you more than a penny for the lot. A penny won't buy enough fabric to... Then I suppose you'll have to bring better eggs next time. Mrs. Foster pushed the basket back across the counter. Or find some other way to pay. The words hung in the air. Mrs. Patterson smirked. Mrs. Greer covered her mouth with one gloved hand, but her eyes were laughing. Hope grabbed the basket. The eggs rattled against each other. She walked out of the store without looking back. The bell jangled behind her. She heard laughter high and sharp before the door swung shut. The 3 miles home had never felt so long. Her eyes burned. Her throat ached. She blinked hard against the sting, refusing to let the tears fall where anyone might see. By the time she reached the cabin, the sun was starting to set. Tommy and Lucy sat on the porch, waiting. Their faces fell when they saw the basket still full of eggs. Didn't they want them? Tommy asked. No, Hope's voice came out flat, dead. Go inside, both of you. She sat alone on the porch until dark fell. The eggs cooled in the basket beside her. The children's voices murmured through the cabin wall, Tommy reading to Lucy from the old primer Hope had salvaged from the schoolhouse. Hoofbeats on the road. Hope's whole body went rigid. Silas came up the path. Dust's reins loose in his hands. He carried something across his saddle, a bundle wrapped in cloth. He dismounted by the porch. Evening, Mrs. Colton. I brought... Don't. The word came out harder than she'd meant. Silas stopped. His hand tightened on Dust's reins. Ma'am. Hope stood. Her legs shook beneath her skirt. She gripped the porch railing to steady herself. You can't come here anymore? Silence. Silas stood motionless, the bundle still in his arms. The last light of day caught the dust on his shoulders, the worn brim of his hat, the confusion in his eyes. Did I do something wrong? People are talking. The words scraped her throat like broken glass. In town, they're saying things about me, about us. What things? Hope shook her head. She couldn't repeat them, couldn't make her mouth form those ugly words. It doesn't matter what they're saying. Silas took a step toward the porch. Whatever it is, it ain't true. That doesn't matter either. Hope's voice cracked. Truth doesn't matter when everyone believes the lie. Silas stood at the bottom of the steps. He didn't come up, didn't push. Mrs. Colton, please. The word broke in her throat. Just go. Don't come back. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he set the bundle on the bottom step. Bread, by the shape of it. Fresh baked bread. I understand, he said quietly. He mounted Dust, gathered the reins. Hope turned her back. She pressed her spine against the porch post and listened to the hoofbeats fade into the darkness. When they were gone, she sank down onto the boards, wrapped her arms around her knees, and let the tears come. Inside the cabin, the children had stopped reading. The silence pressed against her like a hand on her chest. A week passed. The bread Silas had left on the porch step lasted 3 days. Hope had divided it carefully, a slice for Tommy at breakfast, a slice for Lucy, nothing for herself. By the 4th day, there was only a hard crust left, spotted with blue mold. She threw it to the chickens. The eggs came small and sparse now, 2 a day, sometimes 3, not enough to trade. Hope tried selling them again at the general store, but Mrs. Foster looked at her basket and shook her head without a word. Hope had walked home with the basket still full. The eggs rattled with each step, mocking her. Now she stood at the stove, staring into an empty pot. Supper would be water again. Water and the last scraping of cornmeal from the bottom of the barrel, barely enough to make 1 Johnny cake, thin as paper. Lucy sat at the table, her chin resting on her folded arms. She didn't ask questions anymore, didn't hum, didn't swing her feet beneath the chair. She just sat there, eyes fixed on the window, watching the empty road. Tommy sat across from her. He hadn't spoken in 3 days. His face had gone hollow around the cheekbones. His eyes had that flat, dead look again, the same look he'd had when Hope first took him in. 2 years ago, standing beside his parents' fresh graves. Hope ladled water into their cups, set the single Johnny cake in the center of the table, divided it with her fingers, 2 pieces, equal size. Eat, she said. Neither child moved. Eat. Tommy picked up his piece, chewed mechanically, swallowed without tasting. Lucy didn't touch hers. I'm not hungry, Mama. The lie was so familiar. Hope had told it so many times herself. She knelt beside Lucy's chair, took the child's small hand in her own. The bones felt too sharp beneath the skin. Please, baby, just a little. Lucy's eyes stayed fixed on the window. Is he coming back? Hope's throat closed. She couldn't answer. That night, she lay awake on her narrow bed, listening to the wind push against the cabin walls. The children slept in the corner. Tommy curled around Lucy like a shield. the patchwork quilt pulled up to their chins. The lamp had run dry 2 days ago. No money for oil. The darkness pressed in from all sides. Hope stared at the ceiling she couldn't see. Her stomach cramped and twisted. She had eaten only 2 eggs in the past 2 days, both raw, swallowed quick so the children wouldn't see. The hunger gnawed at her insides like a living thing. A floorboard creaked. Hope turned her head. In the faint moonlight through the window, she saw Tommy standing at the glass, his face pale, his breath fogging against the cold pane. She rose from the bed. The floor was ice against her bare feet. "Tommy, what's wrong?" He didn't turn around. His voice came out small and flat. "You made him go away." Hope's chest seized. "Tommy, why'd you make him go?" The boy's shoulders hunched. His hands pressed flat against the window glass. "He was nice to us. He fixed the fence. He taught me to ride. And you made him go away." "I had to. People were saying, I don't care what people say." Tommy spun around. Moonlight caught the tears streaming down his face. "He didn't do nothing wrong. Mama, nothing." The words hit like stones. Hope reached for him. "That's not true." He jerked away from her hand. "Then why'd you send him away?" She had no answer. None that would make sense to an 8-year-old boy who'd already lost everyone he loved once before. "I was scared," she whispered. "Scared of what?" Hope's legs gave out. She sank onto the cold floor, her back against the wall, her hands limp in her lap. The tears came then ugly, heaving sobs that tore up from somewhere deep in her chest. Tommy stood over her, watching. His face twisted with something that might have been anger or grief or both. Then he crouched down, put his thin arms around her neck, pressed his wet face against her shoulder. They held each other in the darkness, crying without sound, their bodies shaking together on the cold cabin floor. Lucy slept on, undisturbed. The moon moved across the window. The wind died down. The night grew still and heavy. When the tears finally stopped, Hope felt scraped out, hollow. She'd driven away the one person who'd shown them kindness. And for what? For the approval of women who despised her, for a reputation that was already ruined. She'd been a fool, a coward. Morning came gray and cold. Hope stood before the small mirror that hung by the wash basin, a cheap thing with a pine frame, the glass warped and spotted with age. The face that looked back at her was gaunt, dark circles under the eyes, cheekbones too sharp, lips cracked and pale. She barely recognized herself. "What are you so afraid of?" she asked the reflection. The reflection had no answer, but somewhere in the hollow of her chest, something stirred, something small and stubborn and angry. She turned from the mirror, looked at the children still sleeping under their quilt, looked at the empty table, the cold stove, the door that led to the road that led to Miller's ranch, 7 miles north, 7 miles. Hope woke the children before dawn. "Get up, put on your Sunday clothes." Tommy blinked at her, confused. Lucy rubbed her eyes with small fists. "Where we going?" "Mama." Hope pulled Lucy's calico dress from the trunk, the blue one, faded but clean. She laid it on the bed beside Tommy's good shirt, the one with only 2 patches. "We're going to fix something I broke." She dressed them in the gray light, combed Lucy's hair with her fingers, and tied it back with the red ribbon, the last pretty thing they owned. Buttoned Tommy's shirt to the collar, wiped a smudge of dirt from his cheek with her thumb. Then she went to the chicken coop. 2 eggs sat in the straw small, brown, still warm. She cracked them into a cup and made the children drink them raw. "For strength," she said when Lucy made a face. "We got a long walk ahead." She swallowed one herself. The slick yolk slid down her throat. It wasn't much, but it was something. The road stretched north from the cabin, a ribbon of packed dirt winding through dry grass and scattered pines. Hope took Lucy's hand in her right, Tommy's in her left. "It's 7 miles, she said. "We walk until we get there." They walked. The sun rose behind them, casting their shadows long and thin across the road. Lucy's short legs tired. First, Hope could feel it in the drag of the child's hand, the way her steps grew shorter and slower. "My feet hurt." "Mama?" I know, baby. Keep walking. 2 miles. 3. The sun climbed higher. Sweat gathered at Hope's temples, under her arms, in the small of her back. Her own feet ached inside her worn boots. Blisters formed on her heels, broke, stung with each step. At the 4-mile mark, a wagon came up behind them, old Mr. Henley from the spread east of town, hauling feed to the mill. You folks need a ride. Hope's pride reared up. She almost refused. Then she looked at Lucy's pale face, at the way the child swayed on her feet. Just a few miles, she said. If it's no trouble. They rode in the wagon bed, sitting on burlap sacks of grain. Lucy fell asleep against Hope's shoulder. Tommy stared at the road ahead, his jaw set. Mr. Henley let them off where the road forked north toward Miller's place. Thank you, Hope said. He tipped his hat and drove on without asking questions. They walked the last 2 miles. Lucy woke up enough to stumble along, holding Hope's hand. The sun was high now, beating down on their heads. The Miller Ranch appeared on the horizon, a cluster of buildings, a big barn, fenced pastures dotted with cattle. Smoke rose from the main house chimney. Hope stopped at the gate, set Lucy down. The child grabbed Hope's skirt for balance. A man came out of the barn. Not Silas. Older, gray beard, leather apron. Help you, ma'am. Hope's voice came out cracked and dry. I'm looking for Silas Wade. The man studied her, studied the children. His eyes moved over their dusty clothes, their exhausted faces, their worn-out boots. He's around back, loading hay. Hope nodded, took Lucy's hand again, walked around the side of the barn. She saw him before he saw her. Silas stood in the bed of a wagon, pitchfork in hand, sweat darkening his shirt. He lifted a bale of hay, twisted, threw it onto a growing pile. His movements were steady, mechanical, the movements of a man doing work just to keep his hands busy. Hope stopped. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Silas turned for another bale, froze. The pitchfork slipped from his fingers, clattered against the wagon bed. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The sun beat down. A horse nickered somewhere behind the barn. Dust motes floated in the still air. Lucy tugged at Hope's hand. Mama, is that him? Hope couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up. All those miles, all that pain, and now the words wouldn't come. Silas climbed down from the wagon, slowly, like a man approaching something that might disappear if he moved too fast. He stopped 3 feet away. His face was unreadable. Dust coated his skin, his clothes, the brim of his hat. Mrs. Colton. Mr. Wade. Silence. Tommy stepped out from behind Hope. His chin lifted. His eyes met Silas's without flinching. She walked 7 miles to tell you she was wrong. Silas's gaze dropped to Hope's feet, to the dark stains that had seeped through the worn leather of her boots. That true? Hope nodded. The tears came, then she couldn't stop them. They carved tracks through the dust on her cheeks. I was scared, she whispered. I was a fool. I won't be scared no more. Silas stood motionless. His jaw worked. You sure about this, Mrs. Colton? Hope looked at him, at this man who had brought food to her table and laughter to her children, and Hope to a house that had forgotten what Hope felt like. Yes. Lucy pulled free of Hope's grip and ran to him. Her small arms wrapped around his leg, her face pressed against his dusty trousers. Are you coming home? She asked. Please come home. Silas looked down at the child, looked at Tommy, looked at Hope, standing there with tears on her face and blood in her boots and nothing left to hide behind. You want me to come to supper? Hope almost laughed, almost sobbed, both at once. Yes. A month passed. Silas pitched his canvas tent beside the chicken coop, close enough to hear if trouble came in the night, far enough to keep things proper. He hung his few belongings from a rope strung between 2 posts, his spare shirt, his shaving kit, his father's pocket watch that hadn't worked in 15 years. Every morning, he rose before dawn, fed the chickens, split wood for the stove, checked the fences for breaks every evening. He ate supper at the table inside the cabin, the table that now had 4 chairs, the 4th one he'd built himself from pine scraps, sanding the seat smooth so it wouldn't catch on Hope's dress. The roof no longer leaked. Silas had spent 3 days up there, replacing rotted shingles, sealing gaps with pitch. The well had fresh water now he'd dug it by hand, 20 feet down, hauling up bucket after bucket of dirt until he hit the water table. Lucy could count to 20. She practiced every night at supper, touching each finger as she went, her voice high and proud. When she reached 20, she'd start over again. Tommy could saddle dust by himself now, could ride him in wide circles around the yard, knees gripped tight, hands steady on the reins. The boy still didn't talk much, but the silence had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. This evening, Silas sat on the porch step, watching the sun drop toward the mountains. His boots were caked with mud from the morning's work. His shoulders ached. His hands were rough and cracked. He'd never felt more at ease in his life. Hoofbeats on the road, a rider coming from the east. Silas stood, one hand resting loosely on his hip, not reaching for his gun, just ready. The rider was old Perkins from the neighboring spread, a man with a gray beard and suspicious eyes who'd never had much use for strangers. He reined in by the fence and sat there, looking at Silas, looking at the tent, looking at the cabin with its new shingles and its curtained windows. "Wade," he said, "Mr. Perkins. Heard you've been staying out here a while." "I have." Perkins shifted in his saddle. His horse stamped and snorted. "What exactly are you doing here?" Through the window, Silas could see into the cabin. Hope stood at the stove, stirring something in the big iron pot. Steam rose around her face to say. Tommy moved between the table and the shelf, setting out plates, 4 of them, arranged in a square. Lucy sat on her chair, swinging her legs, singing something tuneless and happy. The lamplight caught Hope's hair, turned it copper and gold. "Well," Perkins pressed, "what's your business here, Wade?" Silas looked at the old man, then back at the window, at Hope wiping her hands on her apron, at Tommy carefully placing forks beside each plate, at Lucy holding up both hands, counting her fingers, starting over when she lost track. "Because this is home, Mr. Perkins." The words came out simple, plain, like stating the color of the sky. Perkins stared at him, his mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then he shook his head, turned his horse, and rode off without another word. Silas watched him go. The dust settled. The evening grew still. The cabin door opened. Hope stood in the frame, backlit by the lamp, her face soft in the fading light. "Supper's ready." Silas climbed the porch steps, stopped in front of her, close enough to smell the wood smoke in her hair, the soap on her skin. Perkins was asking questions. "I heard." Hope's voice was quiet, steady. "What did you tell him? The truth?" She looked up at him then. Her eyes searched his face for what? He couldn't say. Whatever she found there made her shoulders drop, made the tight line of her mouth soften. "Come eat," she said. "Before it gets cold." They went inside together. The table was set. 4 plates, 4 forks, 4 cups filled with water from the new well. The stew steamed in the center, rabbit and potatoes, flavored with wild sage. Tommy sat in his chair. Lucy bounced in hers, already reaching for her cup. "I can count to 20 now," she announced. "Want to hear? After supper." Hope said, "Eat first." Silas took his seat. The pine chair he'd built himself. It fit him just right. They ate. Lucy chattered about the chickens, how the red one had chased the gray one around the coop 3 times. Tommy told them about a hawk he'd seen circling the north pasture. Hope listened, nodding, adding small words here and there. Outside, the night came down soft and blue. Stars pricked through the darkness one by one. The lamp burned steady in the window. Warm yellow light spilled out onto the porch, out into the yard, out toward the road where no one traveled anymore. Inside, 4 people sat around a table meant for 4. And from somewhere in that cabin came the sound of Lucy counting 1, 2, 3, 4, her voice high and clear in the autumn night. If your chest feels a little heavy right now, that's all right. Some stories settle in quietly, finding the tender places we thought we'd tucked away. Many of us know what it is to sit at a table with an empty chair, to carry on when the world feels too big and the cupboard feels too bare. Some of us have been the one who walked away. Some of us have been the one left standing on the porch, watching the road go dark. And perhaps you know what it is to want something good, but fear it won't last. To push away what you need most, because needing feels too much like losing. These things don't need to be fixed or explained. They're just part of being human, the ache and the hope, all tangled together like roots under old ground. It's okay to let this story rest now, to carry what fits and leave the rest behind. Not everything needs an answer. Sometimes a quiet evening and a warm meal and people who stay, that's enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way through.